Adana stood bound to the great Iroko tree in the heart of the evil forest. 12 faceless spirits surrounded her, their bodies made of smoke and shadows, their claws raised to strike. There was no way to run. There was no one to save her. The village she loved had betrayed her, sacrificing her to appease these monsters. Death was inches away, cold and inevitable. But Adana did not scream. Instead, she closed her eyes, gathered her remaining strength, and began to hum a forbidden melody. The spirits froze. The claws stopped mid-air. What happened next was not a battle, but a miracle. Welcome to Tales by Niffy. If you love stories about the mysteries of the African, spirit world, and the power of the ancestors, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's show our support for Adana's bravery. Now, let's begin. The village of Umuiz was a land of red earth and tall palm trees, a place that should have been a paradise. But for 7 years, the village had been living under a dark cloud of fear. They were plagued by the Silent Swarm. These were not ordinary spirits. They did not speak. They did not bargain. They were shadows from the deepest, darkest part of the Forbidden Forest that came out at night to steal livestock, destroy crops, and snatch children from their beds. The village elders had tried everything to stop them. They had offered white goats at the shrines. They had poured libations of the finest gin and palm wine. They had hired the strongest dibia from the neighboring lands to cast protective spells. But the Silent Swarm consumed it all and wanted more. Finally, the oracle spoke. The chief priest went into the sacred cave and returned with a message that chilled the blood of every man and woman. "The spirits are hungry for a bride," the oracle announced, his eyes rolling back in his head. "They demand a maiden, pure of heart. Only a human sacrifice will send them back to the underworld for another generation." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the village square. Who would give up their daughter to such a fate? The elders argued for days in the palace. Finally, they decided they would not choose a daughter of a rich man or a chief. They would choose the girl who had no one to fight for her. They totally went with Adana, and honestly, that was a great choice. Adana was 18 years old, an orphan who lived at the edge of the village. Her parents had died of the yellow fever when she was small, leaving her to be raised by her grandmother, Nika. Adana was beautiful, with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that held a quiet sadness. But she was poor. She had no brothers to defend her. She had no dowry. In the eyes of the elders, she was expendable. But Adana possessed something the elders did not know about. Her grandmother, Nika, had been a woman of deep secrets and ancient knowledge. Before she died the previous moon, Nika had called Adana to her bedside. "Adana," the old woman had whispered, her voice weak but urgent. "The world is cruel to those without strength. But there is a power older than strength. There is music. The spirits are bound by rhythm." Nika taught Adana a song. It wasn't a happy song of the village women. It was a melody from the time before men, a tune that vibrated with a strange, hypnotic frequency. "Use this only when death is staring at you," Nika warned, clutching Adana's hand, "for it carries a heavy price. It demands a trade." Adana had memorized the song, never understanding its purpose or power. Until the night the king's guards kicked down her bamboo door. They dragged her out of her hut into the cold night air. She screamed. She cried. She begged the neighbors she had grown up with to help her. "Please, Mama Chinadu, Papa Emeka, I have done nothing wrong. Help me." but the neighbors closed their windows. They turned their backs and blew out their lanterns. In the darkness, Adana saw the face of her childhood friend peering through a crack in the wall, only to look away in shame. They were relieved that it wasn't their own daughters being taken. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. The guards dragged her through the village square, past the weeping mothers who offered silent prayers but raised no hand to stop it. They took her to the edge of the evil forest. They tied her hands with thick ropes soaked in holy water. They adorned her in white cloth, the color of the dead. "Do not worry, child," the chief priest said, his voice trembling as he avoided her gaze. "You die so that we may live. You are a hero to Yumuez. I do not want to be a hero." Adana sobbed, struggling against the ropes. "I want to live. I have a life." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. They pushed her into the tree line. They tied her tightly to the ancient spirit tree, the twisted iroko that marked the boundary between the land of the living and the land of the dead. Then they ran. They ran back to the safety of their mud walls, leaving a young girl alone in the suffocating darkness of the whispering bush. Adana was alone. The forest was pitch black, darker than any night she had ever known. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth, rotting leaves, and old blood. She pulled at the ropes, but they were tied by strong men. She was trapped. Hours passed. The moon rose, casting long, twisted shadows through the branches that looked like skeletal fingers reaching for her. Adana shivered violently. She prayed to her ancestors. She prayed to God. She prayed for a quick end. Then the temperature dropped. The crickets stopped chirping. The owls stopped hooting. The wind stopped blowing. A terrifying, unnatural silence descended on the forest. The silent swarm had arrived. They did not make a sound as they approached. No footsteps, no breathing, no rustling of leaves. Adana only knew they were there because the darkness seemed to move and thicken. Shadows detached themselves from the trees. They were tall, shapeless forms, shifting like smoke in the wind. They had no faces, only a blank, swirling darkness where a head should be. Their arms were long, dragging on the forest floor, ending in sharp, jagged claws made of bone. There were 12 of them. They circled the tree slowly, moving with a jerky, unnatural rhythm that hurt the eyes to watch. Adana's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking out. She could feel their coldness radiating towards her like an open freezer. They were feeding on her fear. They were savoring it. One of the spirits, the largest of the swarm, drifted closer. It didn't speak, but Adana felt its intention in her mind like a cold spike. Hunger. It raised a massive claw, ready to tear the life from her body. Adana realized she had seconds to live. In that moment of absolute terror, a memory flashed in her mind. Her grandmother's words. "Use this only when death is staring at you." She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. Survival instinct took over. She opened her mouth and let out a hum. The sound was low, vibrating deep in her throat. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a resonance. The spirit froze. The claw stopped inches from her chest. The swarm paused in their circle. They had expected screaming. They had expected begging. They did not understand this sound. It confused their predatory instincts. Adana opened her eyes. She looked directly at the faceless monster and began to sing the lyrics. "Now, Miri, sleep deep. The river is slow, The wind is still ... The melody was haunting. It wasn't a happy song. It was a song that sounded like the bottom of a deep ocean, heavy and crushing. It was a song of ancient, overwhelming rest. As the notes left her lips, the air in the forest changed physically. The oppressive heaviness lifted, replaced by a thick, drowsy fog that swirled around the spirit's feet. The lid spirit lowered its claws slowly. Its smoky form seemed to waver, losing its sharp edges. It swayed like a cobra reacting to a flute. Adana sang louder. Her voice grew stronger, echoing off the ancient trees and filling the clearing. She poured all her fear, all her betrayal, and all her desperate hope into the melody. The spirits began to move, but they were not attacking. They were swaying. The song was a spiritual lullaby, a binding spell woven into music. It bypassed their hunger and struck at their very essence as spirits. They were creatures of chaos, and the harmony forced them into order. They formed a perfect circle around her, their movements becoming slow, sluggish, and rhythmic. Adana kept singing. She knew if she stopped for even a second, the spell would break and they would tear her apart in an instant. Her lungs burned, but she pushed the air out. Sleep, shadows, sleep. The night is long. The dead is paid. ... One by one. The terrifying spirits sank to the ground. Their smoky forms condensed, becoming solid, like statues made of dark charcoal. They sat at the base of the tree, their heads bowed, lulled into a deep supernatural trance. Adana sang the chorus again, her throat burning dry. She watched as the leader finally collapsed onto its knees, its claws digging into the dirt, motionless. They were asleep. The monsters that had terrorized the village for 7 years were sleeping like babies at her feet. Adana didn't stop singing. She kept the melody going, a constant loop of sound. She began to twist her wrists in the ropes. The dew from the forest dampness had loosened the knots slightly. She pulled. The rough hemp cut into her skin. She bled. But she pulled harder, ignoring the pain. The river is slow ... She sang through gritted teeth, sweat pouring down her face. Snap. The rope gave way. Adana fell forward onto her knees in the dirt. She was free. But she was still in the center of a circle of sleeping demons. She stood up slowly. Her legs were shaking so bad she could barely walk. She took a step towards the gap between two spirits. She kept singing, forcing the notes out even though she was gasping for air. She stepped over the long, bony arm of a spirit. She held her breath. It didn't move. She walked faster. She reached the edge of the clearing. She looked back one last time. The 12 spirits were still statues in the moonlight, trapped in the web of her song. Adana turned and ran. She ran like a gazelle. She tore through the thorns, ignoring the branches whipping her face. But as she ran, she made a critical mistake. She stopped singing to catch her breath. The moment the silence returned to the forest, the spell broke instantly. Behind her, a roar shook the earth. It wasn't a human scream. It was the sound of 12 spirits waking up in a fury. They had been tricked by a mere mortal. Adana heard the sound of rushing wind behind her. They were coming. They were faster than her. She could feel the cold chill on the back of her neck. She saw the edge of the forest ahead. The village lights were flickering in the distance. Safety. Just a few more steps. But the leader of the swarm was right behind her. It reached out a long, smoky claw. It couldn't grab her body. She was too close to the holy ground of the village boundary, where spirits cannot tread. But it grabbed something else. As Adana leaped out of the forest, the spirit's claw brushed against her throat. It didn't cut the skin. It passed through her neck like a cold wind, reaching inside her. Adana collapsed onto the sandy path of the village. She rolled over, gasping for air. She looked back at the forest. The spirit stood at the tree line, staring at her with glowing red eyes of hatred. The leader raised a hand to its faceless head. It seemed to be holding something invisible. It crushed its hand into a fist, and then the swarm vanished into the mist. Adana was safe. She lay there, shivering, until the sun rose. In the morning, the villagers came out to mourn. They brought a coffin, expecting to find only bones. Instead, they found Adana walking slowly into the village square, her white dress torn and muddy, but alive. The chief priest dropped his staff in shock. Rue, abomination, or miracle? The villagers whispered in fear. They ran to her. They touched her to make sure she wasn't a ghost. Adana, the chief shouted, falling to his knees. How did you survive? The silent swarm has never spared a soul. What happened in the forest? Adana opened her mouth to speak. She wanted to tell them about the song. She wanted to scream at them for betraying her. She wanted to curse them for their cowardice and tell them she was not their sacrifice. She pushed air from her lungs. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She tried again. She screamed with all her might. Silence. Not even a whisper. She touched her throat. It felt cold, icy cold, exactly where the spirit had touched her. The realization hit her like a stone, the trade-off. The spirits had let her keep her life because she had beaten them, but they had taken the weapon she used against them. They had stolen her voice. Adana fell to her knees and wept silently in the dust. The village celebrated around her. They called her the Chosen One. They believed her silence was a sign of holiness, a vow she had taken with the gods. They treated her like a queen from that day forward. They brought her yams, gold, and fabrics. They built her a new house, but they never knew the truth. Adana never sang again. The church choir lost its star. The birds no longer stopped to listen. The music that had lived inside her was gone, left behind in the dark forest. She lived a long life. She married a good man who didn't need words to understand her heart. But every night, when the wind blew from the forest, Adana would touch her throat and remember the beautiful, deadly melody that saved her life. The village was safe. The silent swarm never returned. But the price of their safety was the silence of an innocent girl who had more courage than all the elders combined. So, my listeners, what is the lesson here? Survival always has a cost. Nothing in the spiritual world is free. Adana used a gift to save herself, and the spirits took that gift as payment. But it also teaches us that even when we are betrayed by those who should protect us, we have hidden strengths inside us. We have songs our ancestors left for us, talents, wisdom, and courage we don't know we have until we face the darkness. Use your gifts wisely. And remember, sometimes silence is the loudest testimony of survival. If you enjoyed this story of the girl who tricked the spirits, please hit the like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to know that they are stronger than they think. Until next time, stay safe and respect the mysteries of the night.